Good morning, gents, and Happy New Year. Here we are once again, January 3rd, 2018. We get to do it again. All right. Well, as I had mentioned last time, actually 2 times ago, last time we were together, John White shared his story. Wasn't that a good story? Yeah. You know, we all appreciated that. And you want to, I don't know if you're aware of that, but I think you are aware of this, John, but we do record these, and I blog every week, so you're up on the screen. It's gone viral.
Bob's having a hard time reading it back there.
Well, I can't fix that. See an eye doctor.
I couldn't see it just on the screen.
This slide is really not to be seen. It's just a marker. You know, we're not really looking at anything on this slide. See, I'll show you. We're going to move.
So it's not me, it's you.
Yeah, right. That makes it easier. Okay, so 2 times ago, this would have been mid-December when we last met as far as the study. Hey, Tazi, yes, see, you just came in. Good to see you. The last time we were together as far as looking at Jacob, we ended our time with this exercise, this table time that I'm calling it, where we pictured ourselves at the setting of Jacob's death. There's a hospice bed there. Jacob has gone around and he's pronounced blessing to each of his 12 sons. He then charges them about his desire to be buried back in Canaan. So last time what we looked at is, if you were there, what would you be thinking about? And I introduced this idea of what is called liminal space. And liminal space is what some people call this bridge, this gap, this threshold between the past of what is occurring and the future. And we explored that idea, and you guys had opportunity to talk about that last time we were together. So let's read the text just to refresh our minds. We'll look at 29 through 33, but down here at 33 is the actual text in bold that we'll be looking at this morning. So would somebody read 29 through 33?
Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people.
Okay, good. Thanks, Bob. So the text this morning, what we're going to be looking at is the actual point of death of Jacob. And the way the text reads is he drew his feet up into the bed and he breathed his last. It creates a very graphic picture of how Jacob expired. And so that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. There are 3 actions in this section, 29 through 33. I should have put this slide first, but Jacob gave a charge, 29 through 32. And now we're looking in bold here at this text, the second action, and then next week we'll move on and look at, I think next week, Jacob is gathered to his people. We'll look at that text. But right now, Jacob drew his feet into his bed and he breathed his last. This is how I illustrate, this is where my mind went as I was preparing for this morning, is that what goes around comes around, is what I thought is, we are brought into the world. Now, I don't know about Jacob, because he brought into the world, he was grabbing his brother's heel. But generally, most of us are brought into the world, and the fetal position is actually, when we're in the womb, we're in the fetal position. So Jacob had his occasion to be in the fetal position, sharing that space with his brother. And then he lived his life, he went around, and I view the language of this text, the image that it puts into my mind is that Jacob, at the point of death, returned to the fetal position. Now he drew his feet into his bed. I can see it. I can visualize. He drew his feet into his bed, maybe slightly turned on his side a little bit, and breathed his last. I don't know. That's how I see it. So we are brought into the world in a fetal position. Early on, we live our life, and we return to a fetal position. A fetal position meaning one of, what would you call it? Innocence, fragility,
Security?
It could be. I think most people would view it that way, yeah, as security.
Resignation.
Resignation, yes. And I was thinking of vulnerability. Maybe that's not. But this is where my mind was going with this whole thing. That what goes around comes around, and I think the language is just really amazing in the text describing it. And so that's where I came up with this idea that he drew his feet into his bed. He began in the fetal position, and now he's ending his life, expiring. It says, and he breathed his last. So what does this mean for us? We're going to be looking at death this morning, briefly. It's a huge subject. I think the subject of death actually informs our thinking and our molding as an individual for our entire life, and all of society is shaped by this overarching reality that we have to at some point in our life face. And so I have put up here four states in regard to this reality. I'm going to look at, first of all, our state, and I'm going to be using texts, actually quotes, from a book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. Ernest Becker wrote this book in 1973, and it was a Pulitzer Prize winner in 1973. Ironically, the book was published, or actually that the award was given about 3 months after he passed away. So, but it's a definitive work, and I've read this book, I've studied this book because of my work with male initiation, because this all really ties in. So I'm going to lead us through these four points here this morning, and I'm going to use quotes from the book from Ernest Becker. And his thesis in his book is that we thrust the reality of death as far from our minds as possible. We deny it until we absolutely have to face it. And it's a very unfortunate reality of human nature, and and the effect it has on culture and society. And so the default mode of all of these stages is denial. And so there's a state, our condition. I'm going to state that through one of his quotes. And then we have a struggle within that state. And then our action because of that struggle. And then there is an opportunity, which is actually the ending of his book, of what a healthy approach to life really is and what it entails. So we're going to move through here pretty quickly. So our state, first of all, I'm going to read this. I know that you guys in the back can't see it, but I'm going to post these on the website. If you want to get the exact quotes, they'll be up tomorrow. Man is literally split in two, says Ernest Becker. He has an awareness of his own splendid uniqueness in that he sticks out of a nature with a towering majesty. And yet he goes back into the ground a few feet in order blindly and dumbly to rot and disappear forever. That is a really accurate statement of the way it is. You know, we see ourselves as unique, very unique in creation, but yet we die like a dog. I mean, in a sense, we are left to rot in the ground, or we're put into a furnace, and what's remaining of us is then pulverized and into a box about this size, and that creates a tension, a natural tension in our being. Well, the natural the natural state of human beings is that we deny that reality as long as possible. But there comes a point in every one of our lives where we are forced to face death, firsthand, meaning someone close to us dies. I remember in high school, actually I had an encounter in junior high where one of my acquaintances in junior high, his father was killed in a tractor accident. And you know, I felt deeply about that death. It was the first time really anyone, I mean, here he was acquaintance, not a real close friend, but yet it affected me that this boy's father died. His father is not going to be around anymore. That was in junior high. But I remember my most pronounced first event with death was in high school, where it was in the fall, and I was in high school at Longmont High School as a sophomore. In those days, we had 3-year high schools, and I was playing football for Longmont High School, and one of our players was killed in an automobile accident, and I shared a class with him. He was a senior, and it was we were in class, and I remember that day that I looked at his desk and he wasn't there. And that just, you know, again, we all have our first encounter. Each of you have had a first encounter with death, and even those were, you know, with acquaintances. And then, you know, let alone when I remember my grandmother's funeral and seeing my dad cry for the first time. Never saw my dad cry before. But, you know, we are slowly engaged. But the natural tendency, at least according to Ernest Becker, and I adopt this, is that we thrust the idea of death as far as we can from our minds for as long as possible. Well, this state sets up a struggle. And this struggle, what does it mean to be self-conscious animal? A self-conscious animal, says Ernest Becker. The idea is ludicrous if it is not monstrous. It means to know that one is food for the worms. This is the terror to have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feelings, and excruciating inner yearnings for life and self-expression, and with all this yet to die. It just sets up this very gross and what he calls a monstrous dichotomy, a conflict. And then it seems like a hoax, which is why one type of cultural man rebels openly against the idea of God. You know, this is his view. What kind of deity would create such a complex and fancy worm food, is what he says in his book. And of course, you know, just dealing with this struggle, again, forces us into this denial. The third is our action. As a result of that struggle, the state, the struggle, the action, man's natural and inevitable urge to deny mortality and achieve a heroic self-image are the root causes of human evil. I couldn't adopt that more. I think that is a core reason why things are the way they are. Man's natural and inevitable urge to deny mortality and achieve a heroic self-image are the root causes of human evil. And I would say that can be either secular or it can be Christianized. It's the same idea, this heroic desire to be something. Modern man is drinking and drugging himself out of awareness, or he spends his time shopping, which is the same thing. And I thought that was really interesting coming from 1973, his identification with the consumerism of the Western world as a means of numbing and to deny the pain of the reality of mortality. So again, that drives us to denial. These are more actions that we do in order to numb the pain, to thrust it away from our minds. Well, but then this according to Ernest Becker, leads us to opportunity. And the opportunity, he says, I think taking life seriously means something such as this, that whatever man does on this planet has to be done in the lived truth, has to be done within the lived truth of the terror of creation, of the grotesque, of the rumble of panic underneath everything. Otherwise, it is false. Whatever is achieved must be achieved with the full exercise of passion, of vision, of pain, of fear, and of sorrow. How do we know that our part of the meaning of the universe might not be a rhythm of sorrow? To live fully is to live with an awareness of the rumble of terror that underlies everything. And I was thinking this morning when we were singing this, Steve, you had no idea what I was going to talk about this morning, but in that first verse, this is the writer of this verse is dealing with this very thing. Day by day and with each passing moment, strength I find to meet my trials here. Trusting in my Father's wise bestowment, I've no cause for worry or for fear. He whose heart is kind beyond all measure. There's a huge amount of thought and soul exercise behind the words here. Gives unto each day what deems me best. Lovingly, lovingly, it's part of pain and pleasure, both. Mingling toil with peace and rest. This is what Jesus taught us by his example. This very thing. What she is stating, what Jesus demonstrating, and guys, what we are called to is exactly this. And my point is that Christian or not, we as human beings tend to thrust this idea of mortality, but by embracing the idea of our own maturity, befriending it, it allows us and releases us to live life at an entirely different level. Yes.
Boy, so much spinning through here, and of course I go back to Wright's book, which refocuses on the resurrection of the dead, which we say in our creeds, but we tend to think of heaven. But Paul says, if the dead are not raised, then we are the most foolish of all men.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the Christians had a real sense that there is a goal here, not worm food, but a resurrection from worm food.
Right.
And also it says in Timothy that we do not do these things in vain, meaning that our efforts now somehow, in God's economy, carry forward, that they have merit. They're not wasted. We're not rearranging chairs on the Titanic. Something's bigger than that. And
right.
That can transcend this. Now that's pretty flip. I mean, I don't want to be flip about it because once you face death, suddenly all these flip statements get tested. But that was the fuel for the Christians. They were fearless.
And it's the message of Jesus.
Yeah.
That is not only what he did for us through his sacrificial death, but it's his model This is how we are to live. Jesus said, follow me.
And follow
Yeah.
him means follow
Yeah.
him to the cross
And-
and follow him in the
Yeah,
resurrection.
and what makes Jesus' message unique is that there is a resurrection. There is the ultimate, there is life beyond the grave. Now, I think regardless of a person's philosophy or worldview, and we don't all, the Christian worldview is one worldview. But in some other worldviews, like let's say a very scientific worldview, who's that physicist that's really popular? Degrassi or what's his? Anyway, I heard him speak on this, and his satisfaction is just coming to the real in his mind that his life has purpose, and he finds enough, quote, resurrection. He doesn't use those terms,
Right.
but guys, our message, our belief is so transcends that, is that there is a real resurrection beyond the grave. Yes. Couldn't agree more. So I'd like for us now to spend the rest of the time, I've hit you with a lot of stuff here this morning regarding this moment when Jacob expires. He pulls his feet into his bed and he breathed his last. And I'd like for you guys at your tables to just, for the remaining time, I'll pull us together at the end. When did you first encounter death as a first-hand experience? And what I mean by that, guys, is when did someone close to you, when was the first time you experienced that? When someone close to you died. It could be a pet as well, where you first saw firsthand a still body that's lifeless. And then how would you describe your response at that first response? And then, just talk at the table and then go around and say, well, and then how do you now think about your own mortality? So I'll leave that up here and just spend some time and discuss at your table. So.